Now, I get to have this going. Oh, there we go. Now I get to have this little thing on here. I feel like a carnival barker. I hope the people at home can hear a little better with this thing on. It's amplifying my voice. All right, here we go. France versus Britain for control of North America. They had. Ooh, that's enough. Sit, stay. Okay. They had booted out the rest of the European countries. Remember, we had the Netherlands in here, gone. We had the Swedes in here, gone. All right, now we're going to have to get rid of a couple of other folks. You'll see what happens. All right. So where had people civilized? Where had the European countries gone in order to colonize? First of all, the Spanish were in South and Central America. I'm going to see if I can flip back and forth here. This will be obliging. The red part. The red part would be where the Spanish colonized. This is one of the biggest land empires in the history of the world. This thing was a mess. Went all the way up the western part of South America. They had Central America, most of the Caribbean. And I told you what they called the Floridas was not just what we call Florida, but the whole Gulf Coast. And then at their height, they had everything west of the Mississippi, except for a little part up here, the Russian bit. Anyway, let me run back here. Yeah. The Dutch were out of the New World by 1680, and we said that was right around New York. So I'll go back to the map there. The Swedes, same thing. Conquered by the Dutch, they were around the New Jersey area. They weren't as big as the States. They were just little dots up here. Okay, just little small colonies that never really got to be large. Come on. The Portuguese had pretty much what's now Brazil. They had the eastern part of South America. They never came into North America or Central America. They never really went anywhere else. They had their ports and forts around Africa, so they had a large empire. They were a powerful trading and military nation, but as far as the New World was concerned, that's all they had was now Brazil. The British had the east coast along here and expanded. Now, at their height, they also had Canada. So they had a sizable empire. And the French were north and west of the British. And I'm going to use the other map just to illustrate this, just to show you. They had what's now Canada. This is the French. They had what's now Canada. Everybody look up here. Look up here. The British were moving east, and the French moved down through the Great Lakes quite far south. The French were all the way down here, so they were behind to the west of the British as the British moved across the continent. And that's where they bumped into trouble.
Wait, can you keep the
Okay, so they were going to have a war. It was down to the British and the French for control of North America. And I've told you before, any fight, either side can win. If I fight Gus, Gus could win if Gus uses his mind. You have to take a look at what are my advantages. So you take a look, okay, there's about 280 pounds of me. There's not really 280 pounds of Gus. So you would think this is going to be a really quick fight. But what advantages does Gus have?
He's faster.
He's much faster than I am. What else?
I'm smarter. Hopefully.
No, you're dumb.
Okay, let's handle that right away. He said I'm smarter. You may never hear this from another teacher, and probably not from many adults. There are lots of you that are smarter than I am. I'm much better educated than you are, but that doesn't mean I'm a smarter guy. So I'm not offended by that. He may be smarter than I am. Okay, what else? What other advantages does Gus have? Yes, sir.
He can bite you.
I have teeth also, yes.
Like it turned into a
What?
movie.
That is, in actual fact, a really good point. He has better clothes for running and moving. I'm not dressed for that. Gus is dressed in a more relaxed fashion, which could be a huge advantage, James.
He's smaller.
Being smaller is an advantage. If I come at Gus, he can duck under the table and shoot through. I can't, okay? Also, I'm a lot older. It takes me a long time to get down on the floor and move under a table. Boom, he's heading through. So Gus actually has advantages. Since Gus is faster, as a matter of fact, if Gus and I were going to actually have a fight, the smartest thing Gus could do is stay about 10 feet away from me and throw things at me.
Yeah.
And I'd never hurt him. I mean, I could throw back, I suppose, but most big guys, that's not the way they think. They think, oh, snap, break. Let me go grab this kid. Okay? And what advantages do I have? Size, strength. So if I get a hold of Gus, it's over. If Gus doesn't let me get a hold of him, it might be over the other way. Well, these countries looked and said, okay, what advantages do we have? And Britain had a larger population, and I'm talking about in the colonies. They had a larger population in the colonies because the British brought over men, women, and children, all of whom were British, all of whom were loyal to the British king. The French brought over very few French women. They brought over very few French children. What they brought over was a lot of French men who married Indian women, or like we said, took captured English women as wives. Well, certainly the captured English women aren't going to help the French side. And the Indian women, well, that was, those were interesting stories that were told about France, but, if you lived in the wilderness and your life was a little wigwam somewhere in the woods, and somebody was telling you about Versailles, these giant palaces with halls of mirrors and buildings that went up 4 or 5 stories, you'd think, that's great fantasy. That's wonderful, Dad. Beautiful. But they wouldn't really believe it. And how about their children? Their children are raised, and what do they know for authority? They know the chief of the tribe. They know the council, the warriors, the people that they are there and see and respect. The King of France is just somebody that Dad talks about, but no real connection. So Britain had an advantage in population. They also had an advantage in the shipping lanes. Remember, I told you that to get over to North America, coming from Europe, the ships would ride in the North Atlantic because that's where the currents and the trade winds go from east to west. And to get back over to Europe, they would go much further south and ride. That's where the trade wind and the currents come back from west to east. So they don't cross the whole ocean. There's there's an area up in the north to go this way. There's an area in the center to go this way. It's opposite down below the equator. What the British had was their most powerful weapon was their navy. And they had a big navy. And they didn't have to guard the whole ocean. No navy's ever been big enough to do that. What they had to do was guard the shipping lanes to keep France from bringing over soldiers or goods or whatever. So they had that. That was the second advantage. Larger population, bigger navy to control the shipping lanes. And then they had manufactured goods to woo the Indians. All right. Let's see here. Sawyer, when you think of somebody wooing somebody else, what do you think of? No? James.
Oh my gosh. They go, woo.
Okay, let me talk to a human being. All right, good. Yes.
Luring or like fading.
What do you usually hear the word woo?
Like wowing them.
Kind of like wowing them. Who's usually doing the wooing?
To impress someone.
And when you talk about somebody wooing somebody else, what's it almost always?
When it's like in the movies and then like they do something and you're like, woo, and then they just start breaking out in dance.
Wow. No, the expression to woo means to win over, and it's usually involved with somebody trying to woo another person to fall in love with them. So the guy buys flowers for the girl. He is wooing her. The guy buys 10 pounds of chocolates for the girl. Apparently he likes large women. So, this is, when you say woo, they wanted to do the same thing with the Indians. They wanted to buy their loyalty and their friendship. And there were certain things that they could make in Europe. Glass beads, metal knives, metal axe heads, muskets, gunpowder, that the Native Americans had no way to make over here. So these were treasures, because if I have a musket and nobody else does, I'm a lot more of a scary opponent to the other Indians, to the French, whoever I'm fighting against. So these were a good way to buy the loyalty of the Indians. Do you have a question on?
Well, I was gonna say for doing like bragging.
For what?
Bragging.
No.
No, a little different than that, trying to win them over to their side. Okay, so what did France have? France had some advantages also. Now, one more time, Britain had a larger population in the colonies that was loyal to Britain. They had the Navy, their biggest weapon, to block the shipping lanes, and they had the manufactured goods to win the Indians over to their side. The French, however, remember how they came? The French men came to the New World and married Indian women. That means I go over to the Indian warriors and I say, hey, will you help me fight the British? Well, it's not really my fight. Yeah, but see, I'm married to your sister, and you don't want her to be a widow, do you? So you want to help me, but we're family now. So they had the relations with the Indians was much better. They lived among them. Then they also had an incredible scout system. Now, there's a difference between a scout and a spy. What's the difference? Go ahead. Try again. I didn't quite see the difference. Okay. Give it a chance.
Scout is like someone who like tries to basically like look at.
Get rid of the word basically. It means you're too stupid to understand the real thing.
To see it like he tries to figure out things and like try to observe and spy tries to like find things and then the quiet answers.
Not quite, James.
So a scout goes ahead of like let's say they're planning an attack. The scout goes ahead to see like if they're weak endpoints, and the spy actually goes in and like walks around.
There's the difference. A scout observes from the outside of the enemy's position. So a scout may go close, but watches without actually going in. A spy, by definition, means somebody that goes inside the enemy territory to go over and gather information. Yes, sir. Spies what? Spies wear tuxedos and scouts don't? Well, only in movies. Well, maybe Girl Scouts in formal dress would. Selling very fancy cookies. Okay, all right. So you've got advantages that each have. They take a look at this. Why is this? Now I'm getting red dots. All I want is the next slide. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. These guys had 4 wars. 4 wars. Man, this is just weird. What happens is you have the French back here living with the Indians. And they had a couple of fortified towns like Quebec, Montreal, Louisbourg, out at the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. Incidentally, don't say the St. Lawrence Seaway. That wouldn't be built for a couple of hundred years. This is the St. Lawrence River, just an open river. Well, they had just a few fortified towns. And the rest of the people, the Frenchmen, were living with the Indians out in the wilderness, on the frontier. So what would happen would be the British would start moving west, and the French would say, we need to stop this. We don't want them to come to our territory. So they would attack the British, the French would, where the French lived, which is out on the frontier. So the first thing would happen, the French would attack outlying British settlements, way out on the frontier, the furthest out cabins and houses and towns. that's what the French would attack. And they would come with their Indian allies. Most of the warriors would, or most of the soldiers would be warriors of the native tribes. The British, however, they'd already built Charleston and Boston and Philadelphia. They had more cities and they had a lot of farms, of course, but they were a little more to the East Coast. They were a little more, we rely on towns. We don't live with the Indians, we live by ourselves. And so their big weapon was their Navy. What they would do is attack back with the Navy, but the Navy can't sail off to the frontier. What the Navy has to do is go to those fortified French towns and attack those. So that's what they would do. The British would hit the fortified French towns with their Navy. Then they would each race to take as much of the other country's territory as they possibly could. So one time the British grabbed Hudson Bay, and sometimes the French tried to get part of New York, and they would grab this, and then picture this. You have, I don't know, two mean creatures here, like, I don't know, Annalise and Chloe. And they start to have a fight. So Annalise reaches over, she just grabs Chloe's water bottle. Now she's got the water bottle, and so Chloe reaches over and grabs Annalise's pencil case. And they're fighting, and they're saying nasty things to each other, and finally they say, stop, it's over. And they say, not till she gives me my stuff back. And so, before they can make peace, they give the water bottle back and the pencil case back. Well, hang on. This is exactly what the French and the British did. They'd fight these wars, and then at the end, they'd give all the territory back. And at the end of the war, nobody had changed anything, except they lost a lot of lives and a lot of property, a lot of money. So that's all that happened. They were expensive. Lots of people died, and nothing changed for the first three wars. This is for the first three wars. Yes, sir. Yep, happened the same way for the first three wars. Guys.
So, wouldn't they, like, going back to Annalise and Chloe, wouldn't, like, Annalise drink the water from Chloe's water bottle?
No, not
and,
that,
like,
no.
I have no idea.
No, like, wouldn't they take the stuff from their land before giving it back?
Most people, what they used it for was farmland, build a cabin. No.
Yeah, but couldn't you take the farm?
If they did, they just have to give it back when the country made a treaty. If right now the United States made a treaty with Canada and said we're giving Canada Wisconsin, then we all became like Canadians, eh? Okay. All right, Jackson.
They didn't actually directly fight each other.
Oh, they did directly fight each other. The French and their Indian allies out on the border, and then the British would come in and blow up, shoot up French towns, which were defended. So yeah, they fought each other, but I mean, there weren't huge battles, but there were some good type battles. Oh,
But no, like,
they what? No, nobody fights for fun outside of just bare knuckle fighting or something. You don't fight for fun with muskets. No, it wasn't for fun. They thought they were going to win the war, but the peace, they gave it all back in order to make peace. No, it's a war. There were a number of battles. Got it.
so there weren't any, like, line battles, it was mostly just, like, hit and run sort of thing?
For the most part. Yeah.
So no, like, line battles?
Not really. Well, there would be in the fourth. I mean, there were a couple, but the size of battles back then was so much smaller. Like there's one battle from, was it the War of 1812? No, from the French and Indian War, from the next one of these in Wisconsin. There was exactly one battle, and it was like 200 guys came and attacked, and like 75 guys were on the other side of a little fort. So 9 people were killed, something like that. It just wasn't the kind of battle we think about. Okay. Did we? No, we didn't. Okay, thank you. The wars. The first three, all you need to know is the name. King William's War, Queen Anne's War, King George's War. Those were the wars that followed that pattern of conflict. The fourth war was more decisive. This really finished the thing. all around the world. Now you have to remember that they're not just fighting in North America. The French have a huge empire, and so do the British. They own parts of Asia. They own areas in the Caribbean. France owns Canada. Britain owns what's now the East Coast. Australia out there with the Hawaiian Islands. These guys had huge possessions around the world, around Africa. There were all kinds of places that they fought. And around the world, this was known as the 7 Years' War. In North America only, it was known as the French and Indian War, because there aren't Indians anywhere else but North America. Now, just a second there, fellow. Not Native Americans. Okay, cool. It was called the French and Indian War by the British because it was the French and their Indian allies versus the British. Now, the British did have a few Indians working for them, fighting with them, but for the most part, the Indians were on the side of the French. I'm not making it onto the screen over there for the at-home guys. Let me set this up. Okay, I wasn't making it onto the screen for the at-home guys, so I want to get over here where I can see this, where they can see this a little better. All right. This little squiggly line between states. Did you ever look at that and think, okay, look at this. It's a rectangle. This state's a rectangle. This state's almost a rectangle. And the map maker over here went, not really. What is this? It's a river. It's the Ohio River. That's the border between, remember, Virginia went all the way out here and Ohio. And the British were saying, yeah, this is ours. See, we landed here and we can just move west. This is all ours. And the French said, no, we came down here. We landed up here, but we came down here. This is ours. We're trading with our buddies, the Indians around the Great Lakes. This is our land. And they bumped into each other in the Ohio River Valley. The British wanted to build settlements there. They wanted to build houses and farms and make it just part of their possession. The French said, we don't want the British to come in here, so they built forts. And there was a fella, interestingly enough, you probably heard of him, a young British officer, an officer in the British militia. His name was George Washington. He was a colonel. Yes, it's the same guy. He was a British officer before he was an American officer. Now, he was a militia colonel. Let me explain that. If you have regular army, regular troops, those are guys, gals that are troops 24/7, 365 days a year. That's their job, that's their life, that's what they do. On the other hand, you have people, nowadays probably the closest thing we have would be like the reserves, where people can go be soldiers. They train for a couple of weeks a year, and then like one weekend a month, they go and perform some duties. Now, they can be called up and actually go into service, which happens quite a lot. You hear them like calling up the National Guard for some of the riots we did recently. Well, those are like reservists. Those are the people that are part-time soldiers. That's what George Washington was. He had a plantation in Virginia, and he was a commander in the Virginia militia. And the regular British Army was there, but they said, we're not going to go deal with you little French things. We're going to send Colonel George Washington over to the French fort, Fort Duquesne, which was a well-built big fort out here along the Ohio River Valley. And George Washington had a very unenviable job. He sort of had to go out there, march through the wilderness, get all the way over there and, hello. You're going to laugh when you hear this funniest thing. It seems like, no, this is just silly. You French people, you built a fort on our land. Isn't that silly? What you're going to have to do is leave and give me the fort. And of course, the French said,
No.
no, which in French is no. Okay. They said no. And as a matter of fact, when George Washington started heading back toward Virginia to report to the real British Army general, as he was heading back, he was attacked by the French and Indians. They attacked his soldiers, militia soldiers coming back. George Washington very famously built this. It's called Fort Necessity because right then he really needed a fort. So he quickly threw this thing up, got his men inside of it, and they managed to hold off and survive the attack until the French and the Indians went away, having made their point that, hey, this is our land, get off. Well, George Washington made it back with most of his men to report to the British general. The British general's name down here on the bottom was General Braddock. And General Braddock said, wait a minute, I send my militia over there and these guys shoot at them? Well, okay, I guess it'll take the regular British Army to chase them off. And so General Braddock took George Washington as his second in command. And he said, you just went there so you can show me the way. We're going back to Fort Duquesne and I will force the French off the land. So they started marching. The British never quite got how to fight in the New World. Because if you were going to fight in the woods, wouldn't the first thing you'd do be put on white pants and a big red coat? And then this is the best part. It's called cross-webbing. You put this two pieces of white cloth across you and then put a brass chest piece right in the middle. It's like, shoot me here. Here's your target. Okay, cross-webbing, boom, right there. And then they go in, and of course, they want to make sure that they're marching like the British, not like rabble. So they beat drums, blow bagpipes, things like that. When they started, there probably wasn't a Native American within about 100 miles that didn't know when they started because they make so much noise. And they walked off into the woods, going over to take Fort Duquesne. Well, they didn't get all the way over there. They were attacked by the French and the Indians. General Braddock was killed. Okay, well, that's not good. A British general was killed. The regular British army has been attacked. Britain pretty much now has to go to war. They don't really want a war. Leastwise, the British people don't want a war. Okay. They've just fought 3 wars. And in those 3 wars, what happened was they spent a lot of money, they lost a lot of lives, and they accomplished nothing. Well, they had a new prime minister, and he had a plan. Here's my visual aid for the day. His name was William Pitt.
Okay.
He says, I have a plan. He's got his little white wig on. Get it? William Pitt.
Yeah.
Okay, good. You're all with me. Yes.
So what was the name of the general who got killed?
Braddock.
Oh, that's for your armpit.
Prussia, isn't that in Germany?
We'll talk about it in just a second.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, Russian.
William Pitt had a plan. He said, okay, I know you British people don't want to fight another useless war, so I'm going to have a plan where we're actually going to win this one. No, we're going to kick the French out. Britain will own North America. All right? Stay with me here now, British people. This is what I'm going to do. First of all, I'm going to send an army down to Frederick of Prussia. Frederick was the king of a country called Prussia. It is now part of Germany. It was a separate country. There was no Germany at this time. Just like there was no Italy, there were just small city-states. Germany was slightly larger, but still pretty small states. One of them was Prussia. That was the biggest, that was the most militaristic, and they had a great warrior king, Frederick. Well, Frederick of Prussia was also at war with France, and the reason that they sent help to Frederick of Prussia was because what Britain really wanted was North America. And if they could attack with Frederick right into France, then the French, what are they going to be more worried about? Their own country or saving Quebec? They're going to be more worried about their own country, so they will call troops out of North America to come back and defend France. So that's why he sent troops down to Frederick to help him attack France, so the French would pull troops out of North America. Then he gave speeches to raise the morale of the British people. Morale, make sure you spell it correctly. Moral, M-O-R-A-L, means you know what's right or wrong. Morale means your enthusiasm, your excitement to do something. When you have good morale, everybody's happy. M-O-R-A-L-E-S is a Hispanic last name, Morales. So make sure you spell this thing correctly. He raised the morale of the British people because they just had those 3 wars, which wasted a lot of lives and a lot of money, and they thought, oh, good, here comes another one. More money wasted. Uncle Joe gets to die. This is great. This is fun. So they didn't want to fight the war. He had to convince them to do it. Do you have a question, Chacha? Oh, what? Morale is enthusiasm for doing something, excitement. Being into it. All right, next one. 3rd step, big. Big, 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 big. This is huge. This is large. You gotta watch for Mr. Homer to give you clues as to what's important. This is incredibly important. The way most taxes were gathered back then was from the merchants. He had to convince the merchants to let him raise their taxes. He wanted them to pay bigger taxes. They're already paying for those other 3 wars, but he needed them to pay more so he could rebuild the Navy, because the Navy was kind of shot up after those first 3 wars. He needed to rebuild it, make it this incredible weapon again so he could kick the French out. But the merchant said, yeah, what do we get in return? What do we get for all these horrible high taxes? This is big. His answer was, at the end of this war, we will have kicked the French out. And you merchants, you will become really rich doing business not only with the 13 British colonies, but also all the French colonies that we're going to take over. So at the end of this war, you're going to become really rich trading with the Americans. That's really important. Okay? At the end of this war, if you pay your bigger taxes now, William Pitt, which means the British government, promised you merchants will become really, really wealthy trading with the Americans. Hello, people at home. Goodbye, people at home.